Nigeria and 419 are often blended together, and for good reason. We've heard of Hush Puppy and his League of Yahoo Boys, but what if I told you there was a revered king long before these romantic Nigerian princes? A man so cunning and clever that he didn't even need the internet to pull off the third largest crime in banking history. No, he didn't peddle snake oil. He was more audacious than that. Emmanuel Nafude, also known as the Owell of Abagana, dared to sell a phantom airport for a staggering $242 million and succeeded. But this story is deeper than your typical fraud documentaries. In it lies a complex web of mysteries that tie together deception, impersonation, bombings, and even assassinations. So sit back and relax as we unravel how a Nigerian evil genius fooled the banking world and turned international relations on its head. A story where not only bribes reign supreme, but friends turn on each other, wives desert their husbands for dead, and even lawyers abandon their clients before the jury. But before we begin, please show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribe to the channel for more bangers like this. Your support means the world to us and is much appreciated. Now, without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome to Nigeria in the 1990s, 30 years after independence. And it's fair to say its citizens are heavily disappointed. Much of the economic promises made to them by the government have yet to materialize, and the future is growing darker by the day. Despite being among the world's largest producers of fossil fuels, their economy continues to struggle because of low oil prices and shrinking foreign remittances. But amidst the gloom, the banking sector emerges as a beacon of hope for a better tomorrow. They say tough times make strong men, and there was no better testament than the magnificent 10-story building in the heart of Abuja. Seemingly unaffected by the tough economic conditions, the ground floor harbored a commercial bank and at the top a private sanctuary where Nwud himself resided. No one knows where he came from, but it's believed he was born sometime in 1955 in southeastern Nigeria. He was such a legendary character that most sources describe his early life as difficult but filled with brilliance. Through school, the young man was a finance protege, not only good with numbers, but beaming with charisma to spare. By 1980, armed with a finance degree, Nwud ventured into car and real estate sales. But his talents outshone the mundane, and soon, banks were fighting for his attention. The Union Bank of Nigeria secured his signature, and through the years, like a hot knife through butter, he steadily climbed the ranks to emerge as one of its directors. Mind you, the Union Bank of Nigeria wasn't some small-time Sacco. Founded in 1917, it was among the 50 largest banks in the world. To have come so far and achieved so much, most people would have relaxed and enjoyed financial security for the rest of their lives. But for Nwud, it was merely the beginning. Little did the world know, this was just the prologue to a tale that would echo through history. Like all great con men before him, Nwud knew his plan had to start innocently with a whisper of promise and a glint of mischief. He knew that to convince people and their money, it was necessary to mix half-truths with lies. Fortunately for him, Abuja was the perfect crucible. Not only was it a developing city, but it also festered with corruption. You see, in 1991, Nigeria's government declared Abuja as its new capital, envisioning a future African powerhouse. Nwud, aware of this, projected that with the country's massive population, which is 15% of Africa's total, a project like an international airport would quickly take off and rake in millions, if not billions of dollars. That said, there was one problem. He didn't have the funds nor the authority to sanction such a project. But as history tells us, Nwud quickly figured he didn't need to have either. Like most entrepreneurs today, he only needed a dream, and if there was one thing he could do, it was selling a dream. He quickly recruited 5 other close associates from the banking industry, who would help manipulate figures and prepare all the necessary paperwork. These associates included Emmanuel Ofolua, Nzeribe Okoli, and Obumo Sakwe, along with the husband and wife duo, Christian and Amaka Anajemba. Slowly but steadily, the Phantom International Airport of Abuja was coming to life. But of course, building an airport was always easier than selling it. They had to set the perfect trap if they were going to reel in a big investor. To do this, Nwud used his connections to get his hands on a government fax machine. He would then come up with a fake persona, Tourista William, the Director of Financial Planning and Budgeting from the Ministry of Aviation. In a well-thought-out letter, Tourista addressed several bank officials, explaining the government's plan to construct an international airport and the urgent need for investors. The letter was faxed to various banks across the world that fit the description. Private weren't too successful, were desperately looking to improve their investment portfolios, and, of course, banks that didn't know much about Africa, especially Nigeria. The bait was now set, and all Nude had to do was wait. Days passed, and all somewhat felt hopeless. Even Nude began to reconsider that perhaps he had overrated his plan when, suddenly, someone from Sao Paulo across the Atlantic replied. At first, the Nigerian team was skeptical. Had they just reeled in another team of scammers? Was this to become a wild goose chase? Fortunately for them, they were relieved to find out that the lead came from the prestigious Banco Noroeste in Brazil. Quickly, and like a man possessed, Nude turned on the Afro charm. The Banco Noroeste in 1995 was among the fastest-growing banks in Brazil. It's fair to say it was even attracting investors who believed it was an excellent acquisition. With that in mind, some of its directors sought to improve its investment portfolio to boost its market price further. Among those directors was one Nelson Sakaguchi, a seasoned foreign manager looking to make a name for himself. He had received the rather peculiar fax from Africa, and even though it was a somewhat iffy scenario, the prospect of millions in profits proved difficult to turn down. Sooner, rather than later, he hopped on a call with who he thought was the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. You see, Emmanuel knew his current position as the director at the Union Bank of Nigeria wasn't convincing enough to get the deal over the line. To ensure it did, he saw it best to impersonate Paul Ogwuma, the then governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. After all, being a high-ranking official himself, he knew how to carry himself accordingly. Immediately, Sakaguchi was hit with that endearing mix of Afro enthusiasm and learned sophistication. The man from Africa was as eloquent as they came, and he didn't much convincing to schedule a physical meeting, not in Sao Paulo nor Abuja, but London. Back in Abuja, Emmanuel knew he had his man, but was looking to make an even more impactful impression. First, he had his team of 5 impersonate other high-ranking banking officials like the deputy governor, the minister of development, and the director of financial planning and development. Diligently, they rehearsed their performances, and for the icing on the kaki, Emmanuel even arranged a meeting with the then Nigerian president so that he could take a photo with him. A week before the D-Day, the team flew to London to prepare the venue, a luxurious 5-star hotel with limousine services. A couple of days later, Sakaguchi arrived and was delighted to find that his new Nigerian friends had booked a presidential suite for him, and even arranged for a limousine to pick him up from the airport. "Compliments from the nation of Nigeria," they said. Emmanuel's presentation was nothing short of a masterpiece. He carefully laid out all the financial aspects of the airport, all the construction intricacies, and of course made sure the Sao Paulo banker saw his photo with the Nigerian president. Just as the sun set that evening, the presentation was concluded with a $242 million asking price. Sakaguchi was so impressed, leaving him entranced by visions of Abuja's bustling airport. That said, the price was quite hefty, and he just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off as it all seemed too good to be true. Noticing this, Emmanuel unleashed his secret weapon, the commission. Acknowledging that Sakaguchi had flown all the way to meet him, he promised him a $10 million commission should the deal go through. Sakaguchi was now sweating, perhaps from the fact the scent of money was slowly clouding his judgment. He tried asking for more time to think over the idea and consult his fellow Banco Noroeste directors, but the Nigerian governor was quick to enforce an ultimatum. "Many other investors are begging for our attention, and we need to know right now if you are both feed in." That line was enough to break the camel's back. The pressure turned the tables, and now Sakaguchi is pleading with the Nigerian delegates not to exclude him from the deal. He was so desperate that he even immediately pledged a $3 million deposit. With that, Emmanuel Nwood confirmed he had his mark and would soon make him dance to the tune of his music. Following the final day of the meeting, Emmanuel would further fuel the flames of desperation, claiming that the project had to start as soon as possible and would be expecting regular monthly payments. Quickly, they wrapped things up and everyone flew back home to their respective countries. Back in Sao Paulo, Sakaguchi knew he had to come up with a cunning plan to schedule regular payments to his new business partners. That was the easy part. The trick was to do so without alarming other Noroeste directors. To do this, he came up with the idea of using his capacity as a bank manager to make small $6 million payments that no one would suspect. Emmanuel had instructed him to channel the money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, a popular tax haven with zero corporate or income tax on money earned outside its territory. From there, the Nigerian banker would employ his Swiss and Indian connections to exchange and transfer the money across 17 bank accounts worldwide. Emmanuel Nwoud and his team had done it. From 1995 to 1997, Banco Noroeste had transferred at least $242 million to the offshore account. All this time, Emmanuel and his team nurtured the project by sending him in-progress reports and pictures from other African airports that were undergoing expansion and modernization at the time. For what felt like forever, the Nigerians lived free, luxurious lifestyles that even royalty would envy. But as they say, the finance gods are as fickle as they come. In August 1997, Noroeste's board of directors was delighted when the Spanish Santander Group inquired. They wanted to acquire their bank in what was South America's fastest developing city. A meeting was called. As is customary with such proceedings, audits are necessary to evaluate the property's worth. In one report, the board discovered that the bank had been making several underwater payments to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The installments were so regular that the figure had now amounted to $242 million, $465 million in today's money. That was 2/5 of Noroeste's total value and half of their capital back then. All heads turned to Nelson Sakaguchi, who was rather excited to tell them that he had invested the money in a massive project that could double the bank's value. Oh, little did he know. Immediately, Noroeste's board of directors launched an investigation into the matter, and their hearts sank when they found out that the airport was nothing but a mirage. Sakaguchi's heart was broken the most when the then governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria denied ever meeting him. Not only had he been conned, but he was now a fugitive wanted for collaborating with fraudsters. The operation was so big that the authorities were on the lookout across several countries, including Brazil, Nigeria, Switzerland, Britain, and the United States. But you see, Emmanuel was smart. He had layers of safe plans that gave the international police a hard time piecing the puzzle. First, the bank account in the Cayman Islands wasn't in his name. Instead, it read one Christian Anajemba, one of his accomplices. Second, several payments from the Cayman account were made to at least 17 bank accounts worldwide. Remember, Christian had impersonated the deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, and therefore, Noroeste couldn't claim that he was a fraudster without confirmation from the one person who was now missing, Nelson Sakaguchi. Third, Emmanuel and his team were shrewd enough to avoid squandering the money overseas. Instead, they laundered the loot by investing in many of Nigeria's real estate and development projects. Finally, the African banker had the upper hand when it came to Nigerian banking politics. He knew he could erase all of his transaction traces in his country for the right amount. As you can imagine, bursting such a fraud scheme would be very difficult today. Not to mention 25 years ago when the internet wasn't as widespread, especially in Africa. Nevertheless, there was one loose end, one chink in the armor that Emmanuel couldn't control. That chink was Nelson Sakaguchi. Perhaps more accustomed to life behind teller desks than on the streets, Sakaguchi's arrest at New York's JFK airport marked the beginning of the end. Extradited to Switzerland, he faced trial for his role in setting up fraudulent bank accounts. With him in custody, it was only a matter of time before he spilled the beans, and among all the Nigerian fraudsters, Christian Anajemba was the first to fear for his freedom. Surely, since the bank account was under his name, he would be the first to go down, and if he did, it was possible that the world would see him as the mastermind and sentence him to the longest sentence. Together with his wife, they started wondering if they should surrender in exchange for lenient sentences. Meanwhile, Nigeria as a country was facing the bulk of pressure as the international community demanded that its authorities arrest and try the perpetrators. It got so bad that the then president, Olusegun Obasanjo, was forced to set up the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission in early 2002. Barely 2 months later, in February of that year, the commission bore fruits as Emmanuel Nwoud, Emmanuel Ofolue, Nzeribe Okoli, Obumosakwe, and Amaka Anajemba were all arrested and charged in the Abuja High Court with 86 counts of fraudulently seeking advance fees and 15 counts of bribery related to the case. As expected, they pleaded not guilty. But have you noticed something? That one of the accomplices was missing from that lineup? This was none other than Christian Onajemba, who was found dead just a few months before the trial. Autopsy reports claimed he died in a fatal car accident, but rather loud whispers believed he was assassinated by his comrades. Rumors have it that, unlike Sakaguchi, whom Emmanuel couldn't do anything about, Christian was an easy end to tie. With him gone, who would testify about the numerous money transfers from his Cayman bank account? Interestingly, media outlets reported that his widow, who stood before the jury, was rather calm for a woman who had just lost his husband and was now facing decades behind bars. Did she sell him out? Did she agree to take him out permanently to stop the investigations? No one really knows for sure, and these questions are perhaps among the few that will forever stand the test of time. Back in Abuja, all it took were several hearings, and everyone in the courtroom could tell that something wasn't right. They seemed to go around in circles, and it felt like someone somewhere was pulling the strings to ensure the jury never arrived at a conclusive decision. This lasted until July 2004 when, suddenly, Judge Lawalgumi threw out the case, claiming that since the crime did not take place in Abuja, he had no jurisdiction, and said that the proper place for the case would be the Lagos High Court. The defendants were immediately rearrested after stepping outside the courthouse, and the case was moved to Lagos. In 2005, Emmanuel attempted to bribe Nuhu Ribadu, then head of the commission, with $75,000 cash. He was charged in connection with the attempted bribery, in addition to the attempted kidnapping of a prosecution witness. As if on cue, in July of that same year, Amaka Onajemba admitted to helping her deceased husband, Christian Onajemba, and was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and ordered to repay $25.5 million. Emmanuel was the slipperiest of the bunch and almost impossible to pin down. After all, he cunningly wasn't directly affiliated to the Cayman account, and his signature was nearly non-existent on any official documents related to the scam. But his immunity would only last until Nelson Sakaguchi was willing to testify directly against him. Suddenly, he was vulnerable and surely to be taken down. Even one of his defense team, senior advocate Olisa Akbakoba, abandoned him 2 weeks after he collected 27 million Naira of the 30 million. He charged him as a representation fee. As Emmanuel would later give an account, "I never had court experience. 2 weeks after paying him, he said he wanted more money to pursue an appeal. He said that if I didn't pay the balance, he would never appear in my matter again. I told him to go to hell. He refused to come, and I was stranded in court." You would think all was over for him, but as expected, the mastermind wouldn't go down without a fight. During Emmanuel's trial, where Sakaguchi was to testify, the proceedings were suddenly halted. There was a bomb. Immediately, everyone evacuated the premises, and it wasn't until the special forces cleared the building that the hearing continued. Many believed that the bomb scare wasn't a mere coincidence. Many more were convinced that Emmanuel had planned an escape that went horribly wrong. Eventually, Emmanuel Nwude and Nzeribe Okoli pleaded guilty after the testimony from Sakaguchi in hopes of a more lenient sentence. They were sentenced to 29 years in prison collectively, with Emmanuel receiving 5 consecutive sentences of 5 years, totaling 25, and Okoli receiving 4. On top of that, the entirety of Emmanuel's assets were confiscated and returned to the victim. Additionally, a $10 million fine was imposed to be paid to the Nigerian federal government. This was the first major conviction for the EFCC. It's fair to say that the international authorities were rather pleased with themselves. After all, they had just closed the third largest finance crime in banking history. Unfortunately for them, their celebrations were short-lived, as barely a year later, in 2006, Emmanuel Nwude was as free as ever. To make matters worse, he also filed a lawsuit to recover his seized assets because some of them were acquired before the offense. To more of their surprise, he reclaimed $52 million. Once again, the Nigerian evil genius had greased the right palms and, this time, even managed to outmaneuver the long arm of the law. You would think he would take his millions and enjoy a quiet life of luxury and all the beauty life had to offer. But why would he? Why would he lay low when he proved time again that he was above the law? On August 19, 2016, the town of Ukpo in the Dunukofia area was attacked by over 200 people, apparently due to a land dispute with the neighboring Abagana community. 4 policemen were shot, and Emmanuel Okafor, a security guard at a construction site, was killed. The Anambra State Police Command alleged that Emmanuel was a ringleader and arrested him on 27 charges, including murder, attempted murder, and terrorist attacks. Once again, he was in handcuffs and held at Awka Prison in Anambra State. It, however, didn't last long, as he was released on bail barely 4 months later. Yes, the case against him is still on, but as everyone knows, it's only a matter of time before he slithers his way out of jail. That said, it seems the $242 million ghosts are still after him. Most recently, in 2021, he appeared before news outlets denying ever conning anyone. He stated that he only agreed to the plea bargain because his legal representative abandoned him. Vehemently, he refused to be aware of the $242 million saga, and claimed that even though he partnered with Christian Anajemba, he knew nothing of his deal, and only received payment for work he did for the deceased. Of course, Emmanuel could say all this because the one person who could refute his claims was now dead a long time ago. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling content like this. And until then, ciao.